So to help us steer into the right direction as we navigate the new territories, we invited a very well-respected real estate expert to share his insights on the industry's standing, the trends that will soon emerge, and how we can all fare better in this business. Let us all welcome, with a virtual round of applause, today's special guest speaker, a very well-respected icon, if I must say, in the industry, Mr. David Leechiu, the CEO of Leechiu Property Consultants. How are you today, David?
Hello, thank you very much for that very kind introduction. I'm doing well, and hope everyone is also.
Great, great. So we're very excited to know more about your insights, David. What do you have for us this afternoon?
Yes, I have a couple of slides that, if I can request my slides to be brought up to the screen. So, I guess this is an era of bad news, and to the point where people are forgetting that there are some very fundamental reasons to be positive and happy about, despite the level of bad news we're swimming through today. So, first slide. Before I talk about this year, I want to talk about the last 20 years. And this slide shows you in the bar graphs every single 5 or 6 key metrics of the economy, from per capita income, the stock market, remittances, BPO jobs, cement consumption, tourism arrivals. And it shows you that for the last 20 years, we have been going up and up and up. Right? This is one of the longest booms of any country in the world, and certainly the longest boom of the Philippines. And this has happened despite the sea of bad news that we've been living through the last 20 years. Every coup d'etat, every landslide, every big calamity, terrorist activity, kidnapping, etc., 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 etc. We have never run out of bad news, global and local. And despite that, the Philippines has found a way because it's been insulated from a lot of things. Just imagine that from year 2002, when the BPO industry flourished and scaled up as early as that time, the Philippines has become a very serious part, a very relevant part of the global corporate scene. As the world goes into crisis, more jobs are created in the Philippines because of the BPO sector, right? There are no jobs in the Philippines, and so the population, 10% of the population left the Philippines to send money back home. And these two things have insulated the Philippines from the global financial crisis, from the Latin American crisis, from the Euro crisis, from so many crises that hit the world that normally would ravage economies, and yet we continue to flourish. And so because of the remittances, because of the BPO sector, it allowed the Philippines to be insulated from so much damage, to the point that we have been in the best shape as we've ever been in year 2020. In fact, every CEO in the Philippines had massive ambitions, plans, and budgets for 2020, just to be clipped by COVID. And the global COVID crisis has ravaged many economies. It is ravaging the Philippine economy, but I'm happy to say that despite all that, the property market in particular is holding. It is tattering, it is stretched, it is tearing up, but it is holding predominantly. And the other thing I could say is that we think that we're going to be ready for a big bounce back. And so, like an athlete, comparing the Philippine economy to being an athlete, the Philippine economy was in its best shape ever when the crisis hit, when the global COVID crisis hit. And because of that, the damage to the Philippines isn't as bad as it should have been compared to other countries. Next slide. And I have summarized here 6 key reasons why. But I will focus, given the time constraints, I'm going to focus on 2. One is that despite everything that the Philippines has been through this year, the office market is still churning. We signed 300,000 square meters of leases in the first 10 months of this year. So 9.5 months of this year, we have signed 300,000 square meters of leases. And that's fantastic because we are still probably the only economy in the world that is still signing new leases and signing it at this level of volume. And just to compare that with the US of A, the United States has shed 4 million square meters of office space. 4 million square meters is a lot of office space. It's like combining all the office space in Makati plus half the office space in Bonifacio. That's how much office space the US economy has shed. And it has shed most of this space in the last 4 months alone. And between now and the end of the year, they're projected to shed another million to 1.5 million square meters. So by the end of the year, there will be anywhere from 5 to 6 million square meters down. We are still signing 300,000 square meters of new leases. Now, there is also bad news in the office market, and that the POGO sector, partially because of the new taxes imposed on that industry and the assault of the Chinese government against this industry, is causing the POGO industry to contract in the Philippines. And they have shed a lot of space, 200,000 square meters of office space. Now, we can choose to look at the glass half full or half empty. And I always choose to look at it half full because I can tell you that many countries will be begging for 300,000 square meters of new leases, as the Philippines enjoys today. And unlike other cycles in the past, this cycle is different because 30 to 40% of that 300,000 square meters was done in the provinces, mainly in Cebu, Iloilo, and Clark. And I think Clark will continue to flourish as a destination once we get past COVID. I'm very, very positive about Clark. I'm very positive about the new airport that's going to open around the corner. And I'm very positive about the train that's going to connect Manila to Clark. Another thing is that fiscal management of the country has been phenomenal because the Philippines is the only country in the world that got the credit rating upgrade. The Japanese ratings agency upgraded the Philippines, as you know, from triple B plus to A minus. And I don't know how many countries got an upgrade, but we certainly will be one of the few, if not the only one, that got upgraded in the global COVID crisis. We were able to borrow 10-year money and 25-year money at significantly low interest rates, 2.2 and 2.4% respectively, fixed for those terms. And the more important factor here is the spread between 10 and 25-year money is so thin. It is paper thin. And what I'm so excited about that is that for the first time, the Philippines will have a mortgage market. What is a mortgage market? In developed countries, you can borrow 20-year money fixed at fixed interest rates, and those interest rates are very low. In the US, as an example, you can borrow 30-year money fixed for 30 years at 2 or 3%. In Singapore, it's 2%, 3%. In Japan today, it is just about 1%. Free money fixed for 30 years. Can you imagine that? And the biggest beneficiary of such interest levels will be the property market. Because as you know, real estate ownership is so difficult in the Philippines. Besides power, the most expensive per capita purchasing power in the Philippines is real estate. And that is going to change because banks are extremely liquid despite the circumstances. The government is flushing out money from the banks because of lowering the reserve ratio requirement. They've brought it down from 18.5% 18 months ago. Today it's, I think, 12 or 14. And the goal is to bring it down to 8% by next year. And it's also increased the cap of borrowing to real estate. Sorry, the ceiling on real estate loans has been increased from 20 to 25%, and then you've got the reduction in corporate income taxes, which is due within this year from 30% today to 25, and from 25 to 20% in the next 3 to 4 years. That movement from 30% to 25% makes the Philippines one of the lowest tax regimes in Asia Pacific. But to move it from 25 to 20 will make the Philippines one of the lowest tax regimes in the world. And all this combined is going to produce significant amounts of liquidity despite the low borrowing levels of the Philippines. While we moved our debt to GDP ratios from 39% to today 53%, at 53%, we are still one of the lowest debted countries in the world. You compare that to the US, which is more than 100% of GDP. So we have a long runway ahead of us as soon as we get over this crisis. We have the administration to thank for all that has happened to the fiscal management done by the DOF and Secretary Dominguez. And it will directly benefit real estate. And this will have a long, long, long way to go. Now, I'm not saying that interest rates are going to be collapsing to 2 to 3% fixed for 30 years. But I think today, if you want to borrow 10-year money fixed, that interest rate is between 9 to 11% per year. I think it will come a time where we will be able to borrow money at 5% fixed for 10, 15 years. That day is coming. We are getting closer to that day. And when that happens, it will have a dramatic transformation for Philippines. And as the world goes to crisis, more jobs are going to be created in the Philippines. And we are seeing that by the fact that 300,000 square meters of new leases got signed in the last 9 months. And more jobs are coming here. It's not just these first 300,000 square meters of signed deals, which translate, by the way, to about 60,000 new jobs created in the Philippines during the height of the global COVID crisis. But I think the BPO sector will bounce back much, much more in 2021 onwards. And we're talking about when the vaccines are going to come. I think based on everything that I've read, it will be here at the earliest February to as much around April of next year, which means that we only have 5.5 months to tide before things start to recover. And today, more and more retailers are telling me that they are 40%, 50% pre-COVID prices, pre-COVID volumes of business. And at those levels, coming from 0 to 50%, 45% is a really big thing. And at those numbers, they are starting to break even. And more people are out today. More people are able to live with this virus. And hopefully we go by the way of Vietnam, we go by the way of Thailand, where they have lived with the virus. And so I remain optimistic about the property market. I am very excited about tourism because what many people don't realize is that every year we are opening one new airport. And we've been doing that for the last so many years. We've got the new airport in Coron. We've got the new, El Nido. We've got the new airport in Puerto Princesa. We've got the new airport in Bohol. We've got a new airport coming up in Clark. We've got a new airport in Cebu, and more are in the pipeline. And that's just going to make traveling to the Philippines more efficient and more pleasant. And that's just going to mean more tourists. And I think in the next 10 years, the tourism sector will become bigger than the overseas remittances today or the BPO sector today. And that's what we have to prepare for. And with that, thank you very much for allowing me to share with you my views about the future of Philippine real estate. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, David Leechiu. Of course, David is the CEO of Leechiu Property Consultants, Inc. David, alam mo, sobrang, I always look forward to speaking with you because you're always optimistic, and this is the kind of positive that we want to have these days, not the other kind of positive. All right, so we are opening the floor to questions. I think we have gathered some questions here from our guests. Welcome back, Iris.
Hi,
Okay.
Iris.
Hi, David.
All right. I
Thanks
guess
for having me.
the first question that we have here is, as mentioned, the Philippines real estate industry will enjoy a rapid economic recovery in the next 6 to 12 months. So, David, what kind of signifiers should the industry players be on the lookout for in terms of the market behavior to know that the path to economic recovery is really indeed on the road?
Yeah,
David?
I think you have to look at how retail mall is behaving, because that's where most of the spending is happening, in the malls, and tourism, and BPO employment. And I think from today, it's just going to keep improving. We have a risk. We have a risk between now and April, where our cases are going to keep climbing. If we add 3,000 cases a day times 90 days, that's going to bring us closer to 700, 800,000 cases. By January, by Feb, we should be somewhere in the 800 to 1 million cases, just using that linear math. And while that might alarm a lot of people, it might, I'm not saying it will, but it might cause a clamping of the economy. But you have to look at it also that because of the rise in the number of cases, we will be allowed to jump the line in terms of the vaccine dosage supply. You know, and that is classic Pinoy, because the classic Pinoy doesn't like to fall in line. They always make seeing it, diba, when they fall in line for something, whether it's movie tickets or drinks or Starbucks, whatever, they always make seeing it. So in the COVID vaccine program, we will make seeing it on the virtue of the size of the cases that we have in the Philippines. Why you're going to prioritize a country, a big country with a few thousand cases, when you have cases like Indonesia and Philippines with hundreds of thousands of cases? So I think that's the one risk that we have to watch out for as we cross the next 6 months. But I am very optimistic that in the next 6 months, between February to April, the vaccine is going to be on shore, and it's going to lead us to a very quick recovery.
I have a follow-up question on David, because you mentioned that our players need to take a look at how the mall goers' behavior is going on right now. In fact, what we're seeing when we go to the malls on weekends, napupuno na siya. So your reading here is that we are, as a country, are a little bit more optimistic than what we actually express. Lumalabas na nga tayo eh.
Well, also because we are getting so fatigued. And also because I guess many people cannot, many people have been locked up too long with their spouses or children or aunts, uncles or cousins, and they say, I just want to get the hell out of here. You know, the next, besides friends or clients complaining about their spouses, so I'm not specific to husband or wife. I mean, it's everybody complaining about everybody. the next level of complaints I'm getting is from parents who are being restrained by their children, right? The parents are in their 70s and they keep saying, "Oh, my daughter, my sons don't want me out, and you know, I feel so trapped here, etc., etc." So imagine, even without a vaccine, people are out. I mean, the traffic on EDSA. I've been flying through EDSA. It's been incredible. It's been like, oh my God, this is the normal, you know? Can I just say, speaking of traffic,
Sure.
there are 12 infrastructure projects that will be finished in the next 12 months. And like I said before, it's going to be a new Philippines. It won't be a new normal. It will be the new Philippines where all of a sudden, my God, this road is finished. I never even saw it under construction and it's finished and I can use it now. After I've been out, after I've been locked in for so long, I can now drive from SLEX to NLEX in 20 minutes instead of 3 hours. I mean, this new bridge is going to be completed. 3 bridges, 3 train lines, 4 main highways are going to be completed in the next 12 months. That's like 1 new project every month. I mean, there are many things to look forward to, you know. It's really exciting.
Indeed, very, very exciting. Sobrang positive ng nakikita natin. With the way David paints the picture in front of us right now. Iris, I understand you have a question for David?
Yeah, David is so infectious, no? Thank you, David, for being here. Thank you. Thank you. It's always an honor to have you. You know, Ken, let me share with everyone, this anecdote. Maybe about 2 years ago, it was a Saturday morning, and I had to go out and cover David's talk. It was in Ortigas. Wow. Saturday morning, imagine you have to wake up early and listen to him. And there were 2 others, in fairness naman. It was not only David who was the reason that I had to get out of bed. Then I listened to him and actually enjoyed it. That was the first time I heard him, maybe 2 to 3 years ago. And not only did I listen, I actually followed his advice. He said, if you invest in stocks, so you'll have a list of stock portfolio, okay lang yan, but that's fine. But if you actually have a property title, that's sexy. Sexy daw yon if you have a property title. So I really listened and I looked out to the market and, went looking for that sexy property investment. So I really listened to him. Thank you, David. I feel sexy. My question is, would you still advise that now? People with, I guess, extra cash or who want to invest long-term, would you still invest that now or stick to the stock market, which is also very volatile? Any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I always say to people that before you invest in real estate, you have to invest in the stock market because the stock market is the most efficient way to generate capital and wealth. It's also the fastest way to lose your wealth. Well, okay, the casino is the fastest way to lose your wealth. But the second fastest way to lose your wealth is in the stock market. But it's also the most efficient way to create wealth. And so you have to be meaningfully invested in the stock market. And if you already are, then that's when you go to the property market. Or you make your gains in the stock market and then move it to the property market. Because there's always that lag between the stock market and the property market. The stock market will go up first, and then people make a lot of money there. They sell, and the first thing they do is to buy real estate. And the second reason, like what Iris said, is that you cannot make yabang to the person you're making ligaw. Na you have all these stock certificates. It's kind of baduy. But if you say, "Oh, come to my apartment. Look at the view. Hang out in the balcony. Let's have wine." It's sexy.
It's sexy.
You cannot go to some girl and say, "Hey, I've got 10,000 stock certificates from Ayala." Yeah, it's not sexy. Baka isipin cheap ka, di ba? So,
gandang tip niya, David.
Yeah.
All right. I guess there's another question here from the house. No, if 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 you have to look back from 5 years ago, David, what were your projections then? And did the pandemic change that point of view, your projection? How big is the change in terms of the shift in your point of view, your pessimism or optimism of the sector?
So we will never run out of bad news is the first thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Number two, I have been surprised at how bad this crisis has been and how resilient property prices have been. Okay, so there are very few distressed sales now. Very few. We are doing deals now where the gap between pre-COVID prices and today are very small. By small, I mean less than 10%, which is a very reasonable number, right? And that will happen whether it's COVID or not. There are very few distressed sales. Now, the lower middle market is hit very bad now because they lost their jobs. They can't pay their dues. They cannot pay their rent. They cannot pay their amortizations. The government has stepped in to protect them by saying, okay, banks do not foreclose. You have to give a moratorium or a deferment. Small, micro, medium-sized businesses, deferment in rent, deferment in loans, foreclosures. So the government has bought most of the public time. But the upper middle are buying.
Mm-hmm.
The middle cannot buy because they need the banks to back them up, and the banks are just not lending now. But the upper middle and the luxury, they're active. And here's one phenomenon, okay? To the point where we're so cooped up that people are going crazy. You see that craziness manifested in property prices in Punta Fuego, Tali Beach, and Kawayan Cove. Those three places are 20 to 50% higher than they were in February. The transaction volumes in these three places are the highest I've seen in 20 years.
Wow.
And people are like fed up. They say, I want to buy and I can't buy. I want to buy, but I need a few days to think about it. In those days, ubos. You know? So the high-end market is roaring because people are spending. People who sold their houses in Forbes Dasma to move into a big condo are moving from the big condo back to their homes. And so there's still transactions, and they're not debt-driven transactions. They are cash-driven transactions.
That's very interesting insight, David. I remember your first slide earlier. It was a graph of crises, and all throughout these years, I mean, even in the earlier part of the 2000s, 2008, and so on, people were saying, "Oh, the real estate industry is just waiting to burst and fall down to its knees." But then it's like a cat, di ba? Parang sabi nila, it's it has 9 lives. But do you think that we're not yet using up all the 9 lives of this real estate cat? Do we still have a long, as you mentioned, we have a long runway ahead of us?
Yeah. I've always been fundamentally optimistic. And I remember back in 2009 when I sold land in Bonifacio to a client. And it's probably the single biggest transaction at that time. He said, so we're buying this property for 250,000 pesos per square meter. Do you think it will double? Do you think it will triple in 10 years? And I looked up and said, you know what? It's possible, but I can't really say. Today, those prices have quadrupled today. For the same property, those prices have quadrupled. And you know what? Those prices have not fallen today.
Yeah, I remember the transaction. David. We have a next question here. That's quite intriguing. how is the government's diplomatic relations with the superpowers, our friends from the U.S., ex-friend from the U.S., and new friend in China, and probably even Russia? How are these relationships affecting the national property economy?
So, first of all, the best comment I've gotten from a very high level client of mine said, like this administration or not, you like it or not, the reality is that this is the only administration that has successfully put the Philippines on the chessboard of geopolitics. Okay? That's a very big statement. And I kind of agree. How has that translated to real estate? Well, it's only put the market on steroids because for the first time in 60 years, China has invested in the Philippines. And as you know, Chinese capital is the second largest source of capital in the world after the US and just slightly ahead of Japan. Number two, the Chinese investor is the largest sea of investors in the world. And it's only the last 3 years that they bothered to invest in the Philippines in a meaningful way. Third, it is the first time that we have started to look at our neighbors, stop squabbling with our neighbors, and actually try to figure out a way to get those neighbors to invest in the Philippines. I cannot tell you the number of Asian billionaires I have hosted in the Philippines who have never set foot here in 20, 25 years. They went here in the 70s, at the tail end of the Marcos era, and they said, this country has so much potential. I wish we can be like Philippines. This was Malaysia back then, Vietnam back then, Indonesia back then, Jakarta. Today, those billionaires have come back here and they say, wow, I haven't been here in 20, 30 years, and my God, how can we do this in Malaysia? How can we do this in Vietnam? It is, and we're taking that for granted, frankly. We are so obsessed in trying to get investors and tourists from the West, from Western Europe, to come to the Philippines, from the United States or Canada or Australia to come to the Philippines. We're making so much effort to attract those tourists and investors. But 4 hours from here, we have 5 billion people to tap, and we're not tapping them efficiently. It's only in the last 3 years that we bothered with the Indonesians, the Vietnamese, the Thais, the Malaysians to say, when's the last time you came to the Philippines? Why don't you come? Why don't you invest? Exciting.
That's a very interesting point of view, David. I remember asking you some years ago about the ASEAN market, and you still keep that optimism that we should be tapping our close neighbors here in Asia, and of course our friends from China as well. Another question here: what changed in the psyche of the Filipino people that the collective has seemed to become hungrier for real estate investments? Bakit kaya? Why is the market hungrier to invest in real estate? As you mentioned earlier, the high-end market is on the prowl looking for more investments.
Because it's only now that there's so much money in the Philippines. There's never. This is the highest that there. How do I say it? The amount of money circulating in this economy is the highest it's ever been in this. Okay, and all of that is looking for a home. Number two, we all know that we now have a historically high budget, Philippine government budget, 4 trillion, I think. I don't know, correct me if I'm right, Iris, but
4.5 next year.
4.5 trillion next year. And if that's government spending, the next question you want to ask yourself is, wow, that's a lot of spending. Now, how much of that 4.5 trillion is going to be lost to corruption? Let's say it's only 5%, because there's so many honest people really in government. Just imagine that number. It's only 5%, right? That 5% can never leave the country. It will find it very difficult to enter the banking system. And so the only place for it to safely go into is number one, art, and number two, real estate. So that's, well, not just real estate, but the domestic economy. That's how tuition fees are paid. That's how rent is being paid. That's how cars are being bought. Um, and so that's the underground economy that is really traveling through and ultimately finding a home in real estate. And and another thing to consider is that because of this new fiscal stimulus package being done simultaneously all over the world, it is producing an even deeper collapse in interest rates, which means they will go and say, wow, I'm managing so much money flowing out of my ears. I don't have a place to put it. What countries are fastest growing that can give me the highest yields for this money? And you know what? The Philippines is in the top 10, top 20, or let's say it's in the top 20. The top 20 fastest growing economies in the next 30 years. And much of that depressed interest rate seeking capital is going to come to the Philippines. And um, like it or not, this administration has done some good things to benefit the opening of this economy.
So organically, it's a normal tendency talaga for investors to go to the real estate sector investment for the Philippine market. Very, very interesting insight there you have, David. Next question is, given that everyone's working from home, no, what is your projection? Palaging tinatanong to pag merong mga real estate forum. What is your projection for the office market? Should employers and of course their employees continue this work from home setup? What will happen to the office sector?
So, okay. First of all, I don't think work from home is sustainable in the Philippines. Number two, many companies, so we service 9 of the 11 largest companies in the Philippines in terms of occupier space. Sorry, let me rephrase that. 9 of the 11 largest tenants in the Philippines are serviced by us, and none of them have given up space. Maybe they've given up, a fraction of 1% of their total space. That's it. And they have all renewed their leases. There are some companies that have not renewed leases, they have contracted, but that is a very small proportion of the total market. Number two, I think coming out of this crisis, most companies will take an 80% on-site, 20% work from home arrangement, and then the 80% will be hot desking. Okay. Third is it will only take one incident of fraud to bring people back home, because corporate fraud is still a serious problem in the Philippines. It is a serious problem everywhere in the world, right? Which is what caused the global financial crisis, by the way. So it's really the Western economies have the most corrupt corporations also, but Philippine corporations are also quite corrupt. And so the shareholders, the managers of those companies will say, they have a saying, right? Nasa harap ko na nga, nananakawan ka pa, ano pa kaya ako nasa bahay? So all these kickbacks are happening. A lot of kickbacks and deals are happening right now because nobody is watching them. Data security is a big issue, and a lot of data is being stolen. Nobody knows because nobody has the time or the ability to account for it now. But when we go back to office, I'm not going to be surprised that they have lost a lot of data, and they will realize that much later. And they're going to say, what the hell was I thinking trying to save all these little bits of pesos when the data security issue has cost me this much? Next is that we're only able to work from home because we have no choice. Number two, because our workload has been cut by half for most people. Workload has been cut by half. And so, sure, I have 50% workload, then I can take care of my grandmother, my cousin, my baby, my spouse, my whatever. right? But the moment we go back to work, oh my God, and we're at 100% productivity, there's no way. People are gonna go crazy.
That's true. Actually, ayoko na nga dito sa bahay eh. Mas napapansin ko yung mga domestic chores ko over, you know. And what you're saying, David, is that this is just very temporary. And then after this crisis, the office sector will kick like a wild horse, right?
I think so. Now we have to absorb the space that the POGOs are vacating now, and they are shedding a lot of space. I think by the end of the year, they would have shed 300,000 square meters. Now that might sound like a big number, but the total space they occupy in the office sector is 1.7, 1.8 million square meters. So 300,000 square meters by the end of the year is less than 20% of their total occupancy. So that's, so I think at the rate they're going, they should be, if we don't fix this problem, they might be totally exiting by first half of 2022. So 1/3 this year, 1/3 next year, 1/3 2022, and we need time to absorb that.
I have 4 last questions, David. No, but quickly, I'd like to make a quick follow up lang dun sa statement mo that you said we're about to lose 300,000 square meters the space that are currently occupied by the POGO. In your projection, what could be a good sector that might be able to absorb that?
Unfortunately, the only industry that is growing, that has the potential to grow fast enough, is the BPO sector. There's no other sector. Shipping industry, science, robotics, camera lens manufacturing, no industry is going to grow fast enough. And unfortunately, the timing we did this hit on the POGO sector was so bad. It's like the worst time to do it, because I believe that the longer the POGOs stay, the more jobs are created, and that would have accelerated our recovery period from this global COVID crisis. And instead, instead we just make it a little harder for ourselves. But anyway, yeah.
All right, great. Thank you for that answer, David. Next question: as trains continue to connect the metro with nearby provinces, the commute is becoming easier. People will opt to live outside Metro Manila. This is what I heard actually from a broker, that a lot of the clients that he's speaking with are opting to live outside of Metro Manila in the suburbs and commute to work. How will this impact the value of real estate in NCR?
So, 2 groups. The first one are the ones who are mobile, who come from the upper middle and above, who, because of traffic, have forced their parents to say, "Okay, anak, I'll get you a dorm." Do you think that kid wants to go back to the house? No way. So he's gonna find a way to stay out of the house, because he doesn't want to be shackled by mom and dad again, and lolo and lola and auntie again. And so I think more and more of that's going to happen. Number 2, new relationships are created and destroyed by this global COVID crisis. So there are new couples getting together, new breakups happening, and that just translates to more demand for real estate.
Totoo yan.
Third, I mean, nobody wants to say it, so I'm saying it.
Cabin fever, Cabin fever.
But third, and the most exciting, is that land in Cavite, Laguna, Bulacan will really exponentially climb, because the infrastructure is going to make travel time to Cavite, Laguna so much shorter, dramatically shorter, that instead of 6 hours round trip, right, from home to work and back, that's 6-7 hours a day for most people. That will be cut to 2-3 hours. And then the middle class will be able to move to Cavite, Laguna, because prior to that, only the low-cost housing market and warehouse market were going to Cavite, Laguna. Now the true middle class will be able to find better quality homes in Cavite, Laguna, Bulacan. And hopefully when the infrastructure is there in Rizal, because Rizal is literally 5-6 kilometers from C5. And yet, to cover those 5 kilometers, you're better off riding a wheelchair. Not even walking. Wheelchair, naka-wheelchair ka lang or naka-crutches, maglakad ka going there. Mas mabilis pa yun.
All right, Iris, would you like to ask David questions from Rivka and the rest of the team?
Yes, David, my colleague Kath, she covers tourism, so she has a question. You mentioned airports a while ago. Is the Philippine tourism sector still attractive? How can it attract potential investors, given that it was hard hit by the pandemic? Boracay has reopened, but I hear it's really empty. It's like a ghost town. So how can they navigate through this?
First of all, I think we're very lucky that one of the most competent
Secretary
cabinet ministers would be the Secretary of Tourism with Secretary Puyat, and she's been fantastic. So I think local tourism, which is 92% of tourism in the Philippines, will flourish, and some who can afford it will take the plane. So Balisin, or some say Balisin, and Amonpulo have done really, really, really well, right? Yeah. And I think Boracay will follow. They just bypassed Boracay because they found a new love in, meaning they found Balisin and then they fell in love with Balisin, not fell in love in Balisin but with Balisin, and people are just so tired of Boracay. Next is that there's still some things to fix in Boracay, honestly. We demolished those encroaching structures, but we did not clean up the mess. We have to finish that work by stripping it clean and restoring the property. Instead, what we did was we tore the structures down and then we left it there. And it's been rotting there. Some people have described it as a war zone. So, but that's going to change. Number two, when that San Miguel Airport is finally completed, and San Miguel is allowed to build a bridge, and you know what? San Miguel might as well take the road, right? Just imagine what San Miguel can do if it was allowed to mold Boracay, right? Why do we have this two-lane tricycle road that is half underwater half the time? That is so disgusting, right? Why can't we build a proper sewer system, which is being done, but it could be done better? I mean, I can keep going on and on about Boracay. Boracay is my first love. It still is my love right now, but I'm just so heartbroken every time I go there. But so many people say it's so beautiful. But actually what they're referring to is Station 1 and Shangri-La is beautiful. But that is not all of Boracay,
Can I have a follow-up question in this, the tourism question? No? Brief projection, David. Outside of what you mentioned, Boracay, Balisin, and in the Palawan grid, is there any other interest areas that you project would, be a good destination after this pandemic? And what's your take on the growth for that location?
So two places. Central Northern Luzon, number one, and the Turquoise Triangle. Turquoise Triangle. The Turquoise Triangle is the term that the Department of Tourism, prior to this administration, to be explicit about that, they call this Turquoise Triangle, which is the triangle from Cebu, Boracay, Bohol, and Palawan, right? And this geography, which is it should be a turquoise square or rectangle, whatever, but it's a triangle. is one of the most beautiful places to dive, one of the most beautiful places to swim, to free dive, to do so many things. And and Cebu is becoming that gateway for this whole region, and it's complementing Clark. And when Clark opens, you've got some of the best roads to drive through for the next 200 kilometers going north and northeast. Some of the best roads to drive through, and um, I'm very excited about the entire coastline of northern Luzon because that is like Australia, except that the sand is darker. The beach is 50 to 100 meters wide in some cases, and it stretches till the horizon, and it is gorgeous, and it is untapped. And unfortunately, it is untapped because we have a lot of goon politicians that control these provinces, and it prevents valid investors from investing there because they get harassed. I won't specify who because I don't want my car to blow up, but you know what happens if it does. So, but I'm very excited about that. And people will enter Clark, and then from Clark fly to the Turquoise Triangle, from to Cebu or Bohol or Palawan directly, without having to go through Manila. Imagine if you're from Hong Kong and you want to go to LU, which is La Union, for surfing. You have to go from Hong Kong to Manila, Manila to La Union. That is like a 9-hour journey,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And it is longer pa to fly. It's longer pa to go from Naiya to Balintawak than it is to go from Hong Kong to Manila. I mean, it's insane.
Agreed,
So,
agreed, yes.
That's true.
but from Hong Kong going to Clark, you will not only land on time, leave on time and land on time, but your travel time will be cut by at least 40 minutes by plane because it's closer. And then from Clark, unlike Naiya, where it takes you 30, 40 minutes to get your bag and check out to immigration, etc., etc., ito 10 minutes lang, you're out, and then you're driving through the best roads. It'll be a fantastically new experience for the Hong Kongese, the Singaporean, the Chinese guy who comes here. And they will say, wow, okay pala sa Philippines, just don't go through Manila.
That's actually true. Very, very excited to do all these vacation na. Pagod na tayo dito sa bahay. Thank you so much, David. I think one last important question that I'd like to ask from you before we close this session and we call back Lucien for his message. Ito, kay Sir Mike Maneze, what was your projection, David? Will there be increasing advertising expenditures on real estate once this crisis, is over? What was your projection? When is this coming back?
I think it's going to have to come back. It might get, it might get a little harder before it gets better. But I definitely think that advertising is going to come back because the buyers are there. I mean, you look at the big developers, the 10 biggest developers sold 66 billion pesos in pre-sales in 3 months during the heart of the lockdown. And that slide that I had before, umikot sa isa sa mga CEOs of this companies, and he said, "Oy, this is fake news, ah." And I said, "Why? Is it wrong? Because it came from your team." And I said, "I want to scold them because they underreported what we sold to you." Meaning the actual number is much bigger than what they reported to us. So I think the advertising is going to keep coming back. They're just not doing it now because most developers are 50 to 70% down in revenue and therefore earnings. But when they realize that the condo market is still there and it's generating some traffic, they're gonna start spending again in advertising, in marketing. Especially because the sales force cannot be going around as much. So they have no point, but no way to reach the audience
the
except
market.
through marketing and advertising.
That's true. That's true, and that's correct. I mean, we observed that back in the previous crisis, na those brands, those property developers who continued to advertise, actually had a better, bigger results post-crisis. Thank you so much, David Leechiu, and of course our editor, Iris, for joining us this afternoon. Really, really interesting conversation we had.